So let's go to the Echoes of Columbine forum, which is a very, very interesting place. Over the years, there have been a lot of astute researchers who've dug up tons of evidence. Now, the coincidence theorists pretend these are just insane ramblings, but these are actual police reports from multiple agencies, FBI reports. Everything is documented here. So even the most devout coincidence theorists might raise an eyebrow here, but we'll see. So this was posted by a Jarm 2014. Now this is on Tapatalk, so I'm guessing it was copy pasted or archived. So the date here is July 11th, 2021. I'm not sure if that was the original date it was posted or if it was posted much earlier, years earlier even. I was talking to someone about how the official story of Columbine is a lie, and they agreed. However, they concluded that it was just a local cover-up and nothing more. They thought that since the FBI agent, Fusilier, who ran the investigation had a son in the Trenchcoat Mafia, what a coincidence, and that Chris Morris's mother worked for law enforcement, what a coincidence, the rest of the kids who were involved were let off the hook. They agreed that Harrison Klebold had help in carrying out the attack, but they did not believe it was a black op or covert operation. I tried to explain to this person why I believed it was a covert operation, but I found myself not being able to think of a ton of reasons, so my question for everyone is this. What is the greatest hits of evidence suggesting Columbine was a covert operation? In other words, what's the best evidence that suggests it was another Oklahoma City bombing, 9/11, 7/7 London bombing, etc.? So, obviously, there's a lot of funny business in the official account. It seems quite asinine for anyone to believe that two guys could have carried this all out. I mean, obviously, the coincidence theorists and devout authority-worshipping cultists with blind faith in the corrupt on the idiot box will maintain that. But even if you watch, just go through the early police reports. I mean, law enforcement, before the fix was in, I mean, they were looking for multiple suspects. They were storming the high school even at night, looking for multiple suspects still in the building. I mean, we went over 100 eyewitness accounts of people that were there, many of which not only knew Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold specifically, but also Chris Morris, Robert Perry, all these other guys. So they knew all these individuals. So it's pretty hilarious how these goofs who weren't there, who don't know all these people, know better than the eyewitnesses what they saw. I mean, the clueless goofery of coincidence theorists knows no bounds. So, obviously, it seems like there were more than two people involved. Now, there is the very serious question of what kind of operation was this? Was it simply a group of kids acting by themselves, or did they have assistance from government agencies or government operatives at the least, may or may not be working on sanctioned projects with other agencies, or anything in between? So here's a response here by Null. Agent Fusilier's son was an associate, but not a member of the Trenchcoat Mafia. That's actually disputed. I've never been able to tell if, because again, Trenchcoat Mafia, different members of the Trenchcoat Mafia named other people as members or not members, depending on who you ask. So it's, again, really silly for all these goofs to hallucinate that they can definitively name who was and wasn't a member, when the official members gave differing accounts of who was or wasn't a member. I mean, this isn't rocket science, but a lot of goofs have trouble with this, just looking at the comment section from the previous podcast. I've never been able to tell if Morris's mother was a police officer or just an employee of the Cherry Hills Police Department. So either way, she's an employee of the police department, either as in a police officer capacity or in a different capacity, but clearly a member of the government of the police department. So anyway, here are my best guesses in response to your question. 1. The numerous drills and training events that took place in the days leading up to April 20th. April's Youth Advisory Council meeting, the shooting drill at Mesa Ridge on April 12th, the crisis management session in the week before the shooting, and the state workshop on April 19th all come to mind. Now, what's curious is you could write off one of those as coincidence. Maybe two. Maybe three. But all of them? I mean, that's kind of crazy. 2, the piss poor law enforcement response that went far beyond any restrictive procedural measures at the time. Example, few officers outside up to half an hour after the shooting, barely any officers on the east side of the school at the same time, sharpshooter with a lock on Klebold told not to fire, police told not to rescue victims, etc. 3, the middle-aged man, or handler, who numerous witnesses saw wielding a shotgun and accompanying Klebold in the science hall. He was definitely not a member of the Trenchcoat Mafia. Also, the other adults seen cavorting around with the primary suspects. And again, the coincidence theorists write all of that off. 4, the other bodies in the cafeteria, among other locations, some of which were reportedly clothed in black, relates to witness reports of a shootout in the cafeteria between SWAT and the suspects. Could not have happened if the Trenchcoat Mafia kids were the only ones involved. Or if Eric and Dylan were the only ones involved. 5, the high degree of involvement by the FBI, ATF, other federal agencies. They were present in all aspects of the investigation with leading roles. The U.S. Army, NATO, and others also reportedly responded. And another curiosity here, too, like this, Columbine was not the first school shooting. So it's not like this was the very first school shooting and they just sent all the agencies. There were plenty of other school shootings, you know, not dozens and dozens, but there were other school shootings and school bombings, and it did not, I mean, this is clearly not the way any of this is normally handled. 6, the weird, unsolved, or suspicious deaths surrounding the case, especially the subway killings, Joe Stair, and an unusually high number of first responders who died in the years following. And again, if you haven't checked out the previous podcast, I've actually gone over that. I mean, there's dozens of suspicious deaths. Now again, look at other school shootings. They're traumatic events, no doubt. And yet there aren't dozens and dozens of people in mysterious deaths surrounding other school shootings. I'm talking about pre-Columbine. And some post, but I'm not talking about the most recent one in the past. The most recent ones in the past, like 2, 3, 4 years. We're not talking about those. But just in a few years, in the years before Columbine and 1, 2 years after, again, you do not see this high strangeness or this amount of coincidence and anomaly. 7, the spate of shootings and plots which occurred across the country before, during, and after Columbine, some of which, at least by proximity, seemed linked to the shooting, and the investigators' remarkable lack of curiosity in investigating said links. Now, I believe they're referring to the attempted shootings regarding Trenchcoat Mafia members, which was obviously a nationwide, if not worldwide organization, which was denied, but there's clear evidence in terms of message boards and all that. I'll probably be going over all of that in the next episode. 8, apparent foreknowledge on the part of a number of individuals outside the Trenchcoat Mafia, example, Robert Letcher. 9, instances of obvious harassment and intimidation endured by many of the survivors, examples, mail opened, wires tapped, threats, etc. Seems hard to believe they'd go into that much trouble if it was just a small ring of kids. And that's a great point there, and we've gone over all of the eyewitness accounts, or just about all of them, went over 100 accounts. And the clear intimidation, I mean, to me, one of the most damning things is how certain parents didn't even want, they didn't even want their kids to be interviewed because they feared they wouldn't be believed. I mean, what kind of insanity is that? Clearly, they're talking about multiple suspects, possible SWAT shootouts, things that don't match the official narrative. They're so distraught, the parents won't even, certain parents didn't even allow their kids to have follow-up interviews with the FBI or other law enforcement, because they were too distraught by that, and they specifically stated they feared they wouldn't be believed, and they didn't want to be badgered and belittled and clear intimidation. Again, if you go back and look at all of the transcripts from the interviews, I mean, it's just insanity. 10, early reports of highly sophisticated bombs, including an anti-personnel device connected to a detonator that was found in the kitchen.
And new evidence tonight, Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris may not have acted alone. FBI sources tell CBS News the detonator on the propane tank bomb found in the kitchen is so sophisticated, it is unlikely that the two made it themselves. Bill?
And that was swept under the rug early as well. 11, many of those in the trenchcoat mafia had parents who were either third-party politicians, worked for the police, or were in the military. And that is curious, because again, let's just take, if you just take a sample size of kids, like, not everybody works for the police or were in the military. I mean, there's plenty of people's parents who are doctors, lawyers, blue-collar workers of all kinds, garbage men, painters, I mean, construction workers. So, but it appears, I mean, that is a curiosity just statistically. Like, what are the chances? I mean, yeah, it was a relatively opulent area, but there's plenty of jobs that make a lot of money that are not. I mean, police officers aren't even that high paid. Same thing with the military. I mean, politicians maybe, but there's so many other types of jobs that are pretty high paying jobs in that area. So it's kind of strange how that just so happened to line up statistically. A response here by a user named Government Patsy. Unfortunately, we have barely any background on the Trenchcoat Mafia's families, but I suspect a serious background investigation would reveal that the core members were drawn from families involved with military, law enforcement, or business, political, and or civic elites, including the evangelical circuit. Similar to this possibly related case, the U.S. Patriot, Volume 2, Number 3, November 1995, page 20. R. Roy Blake first became aware of the Satanic intelligence tie while doing research for an article concerning an accidental, in quotations, killing that involved members of a teenage satanic cult in Aurora, Colorado. In that incident, teenagers told Blake that the teenage Satanist who accidentally, in quotations, killed the other teenager had such a mental hold over the other teenagers that they had first told police that an unknown intruder had committed the killing, a story that only broke down when police separated the teenagers for further questioning. In the chaos created by the killing, teenagers told of a ritual site underneath the runways at Stapleton Airport that had seen both animal and human sacrificial ceremonies. The cult, although containing a large number of high school students known officially as stoners, both for their love of heavy metal music and prodigious use of drugs, was not led by teens, but rather by older and apparently respectable pillars of the community drawn from the professions, business community, local government, and the military. As soon as the dust began to settle, however, the teenage sources uncharacteristically refused to talk further, leading Blake to speculate that the cult was once again back in business. So this is a very, very interesting case with this information here from the November 1995 issue. I mean, this is kind of crazy. So to all the coincidence theorists that don't believe this is going on, I mean, again, this isn't actually that mind-shocking. I mean, a lot of cults that involve teenagers, they are led by older people with ties to the upper echelons of society. This is nothing new. I mean, Ted Gunderson exposed a lot of this a long time ago. I mean, there's still a lot of coincidence theorists and authority-worshipping cultists who pretend that that's all nonsense. But, I mean, for those that don't know, Ted Gunderson, again, former head of the FBI, nothing to gain, everything to lose. Also involved in the Gosh case, the Johnny Gosh case, who coincidentally reportedly taken to Colorado. If you haven't checked out the Johnny Gosh series, take that out. But continuing the post here, I can say that in addition to Eric Harris, Joe Stair may have had a parent involved with classified military work. Amanda Stair once indicated that their father had served in the Air Force, albeit briefly, before finding employment on Kodiak Island. She couldn't recall what he did there, but one of the largest employers on the island is the sprawling U.S. Coast Guard base, the largest tenant of which is the Coast Guard Air Station. Trenchcoat Mafia member Tad Bowles told investigators that he used to play paintball with Harrison Klebold just north of Sedalia, Colorado, an unincorporated town with a population of less than 200. Wow. And from the files here, this is page 10,656 from the 11K report. Thaddeus Mordecai Bowles, April 30th, 1999 report. Littleton, Colorado, was interviewed by investigator Thomas Wilson, DJTTF, and investigator Frank Vanasak, CBL, on April 22nd, 1999. After being advised of the interviewing investigator's identification, Bowles provided the following information. Bowles obtained his GED in 1998 and was not attending Columbine High School at the time of the shootings. Bowles stated that he was the individual who started the Trenchcoat Mafia group. He claimed to be the first person to wear a duster to school. He thought the group size was now between 20 and 25 people. He had video classes with Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris and also played paintball with them at a field north of Sedalia, Colorado. He said the group even practiced fencing at Chris Morris's house. So that's a curiosity. If you haven't checked out the Johnny Gosh series, actually go into Sedalia and the known cults in that area, as well as high political elite connections, including the Bush family there. So, yeah, a lot of funny business going on in Sedalia, Colorado. Tamara Rumor, page 7098, said she had seen Trenchcoat Mafia associate Brooks Brown visiting a residence in Sedalia, Colorado, specifically to see an older male who is employed at Blackjack Pizza as a delivery driver. This is possibly Phil Duran, but he didn't specify. She offers an unsettling account of Brown's conduct. So this is document 7098. Rumors said that she has known Brooks Brown at Columbine High School since he was a sophomore. She said when she first met him, he was going with a girl who was a student assistant in the attendance office. And she said she was a little upset with him about what was going on in the attendance office. She did not elaborate, but the implication was that Brown and his girlfriend were making out. Rumor recalls that about 2 months prior to the incident, Brown came up to her and made the comment, "I know where you live, and I've seen you riding your horse." She said it unnerved her because nobody knows where I live. She resides in Sedalia, lot number 99 on the attached map. She said she had seen Brown at a residence in Sedalia, which she identified to me on a telephone book map of her development as being lot number 83. The residents at that location, as listed in the telephone book, are R and J E. Rumor describes the specific person which Brown visited as an older male who was employed at Blackjack Pizza as a delivery driver. She did not know anything about the people who lived at this address. Rumor said the encounter had caused her to feel uneasy about Brown. A check of Rapid Start reveals no record of anyone named E, nor is there any record of any other leads involving Sedalia. A check of DMV records reveals the following persons and vehicles at the listed address. So in this public document, she names Ronald and Jerry Edlund, the E's. So do they not exist? So there's no record of any Edlunds there? So these are ghosts, spooks. The government patsy poster continues on here. Who Ronald and Jerry Edlund are, what their significance is, remains unknown. But Sedalia, Colorado is known to be a hotbed for cult activity. Example, the Brotherhood of the White Temple, which has been headquartered there since the end of World War II. The Encyclopedia of Occultism and Parapsychology lists the Brotherhood of the White Temple is a theosophical occult organization founded in 1903 in Denver, Colorado by Maurice Doreal, the religious name of Claude Doggins. A lifelong student of the occult, Doreal claimed to have spent 8 years in Tibet during the 20s. He also claimed to have made contact with the Great White Lodge, the advanced beings who completed their work on Earth and who are now, as masters, guides of the destiny of humankind. Doreal was seen as the agent for the coming Golden Age. Associated with the Brotherhood is the White Temple Church. The Brotherhood was headquartered in Denver for many years, but immediately after World War II, in the atmosphere of anxiety over a possible atomic war, the Brotherhood built a new headquarters complex in Sedalia, Colorado, in a valley surrounded by high mountains. The headquarters were formally moved in 1951. 2 years later, Doreal predicted the coming biblical Battle of Armageddon for later in the year. It did not occur, but members continued to stockpile food and other resources they might need should war break out. The Brotherhood teaches a system of Gnosticism that draws heavily on the theosophical and Kabbalistic writings. The human soul is pictured as the spark of the divine that has devolved into matter. This experience has overwhelmed the soul, which has lost the harmony it had after being created. Teachings emphasize methods of re-establishing harmony and, with the aid of the masters, returning to the divine realms. New members complete a series of lessons and progress through neophyte and temple grades, which can take 4 to 5 years, after which members are invited into the real inner work of the group. Some of the older members reside at the center in Colorado, but the great majority live around the country and stay in contact through correspondence. The organizations published a periodical, Light on the Path, and a set of booklets written by Doreal called The Little Temple Library. The more than 100 titles in the library cover a broad range of occult topics. This circuit was connected with an interstate criminal network involved with a range of illegal activities, including drugs, arms, child trafficking, pornography, and the production of snuff films, all connected with and protected by elements of CIA and the Defense Department. Government Patsy wrote that after quoting the encyclopedia here. I'm also curious about the ostensibly church-related program under which Robin Anderson was traveling to New York and Washington, D.C. only weeks before the massacre. And about the redacted section of the report. This is document 10,635. When asked who devised the label of Trenchcoat Mafia, Robin Anderson replied that initially she believed that Chris Morris attended a meeting some time ago to represent the Trenchcoat Mafia for their induction into this national organization. Let me read that again for the coincidence theorists. For all the goofs who think that the Trenchcoat... There's still goofs out there who think the Trenchcoat Mafia didn't even exist and it was made up, let alone expanding beyond the halls of Columbine High School. When asked who devised the label of Trenchcoat Mafia, Robin Anderson replied that initially she believed that Chris Morris attended a meeting some time ago to represent the Trenchcoat Mafia for their induction into this national organization. So even if Robin Anderson is mistaken here, what is causing her to say this? She then stated that no one else from Columbine High School attended this national level meeting and that the name Trenchcoat Mafia was just adopted by that group at her school. And then there's a whole bunch of redacted. There's multiple sentences here redacted. Then we have this. She also stated he wears a very dark green colored beret that looks black. She stated that as far as she has been told by Chris Morris, he's the only official member of the Trenchcoat Mafia. And that she feels he looks down on the others since they are not official members. That's actually really curious. So, according to Robin Anderson in document 10,635, she's stating here that there's some kind of national organization known as the Trenchcoat Mafia. Chris Morris is officially a member of the national organization, and then all the other members at Columbine are not official members. They're just under the generic label Trenchcoat Mafia. That's really curious, and how does she know this information? Robin Anderson, of course, Dylan Klebold's close friend and date for the prom. Robin Anderson, of course, the one who purchased the shotguns and rifle at the gun show from alleged CIA handlers. It gets a little complicated here because Mark Maines was a co-worker at Blackjack Pizza. He sold Dylan the Tech DC-9 and went shooting with them at Rampart Range. Philip Duran, who introduced Dylan and Eric to Mark Maines, was in order to make the gun deal. And then Robin Anderson is also involved in the purchase of guns. So we have this circle. Mark Maines, Philip Duran, Robin Anderson. Robin Anderson also claiming that there's some kind of national trenchcoat mafia that only Chris Morris is a part of. Why has this not been thoroughly addressed anywhere? I don't know, but this is MINDSHOCK, where we go down every rabbit hole. This is right on official document 10,635. And yet the coincidence theorists probably don't want to address this at all. Now, of course, there's the death education classes, all the occult connections. I mean, this is just flat out insanity. You have Brooks Brown, also in Brooks Brown, Tad Bowles, also connected to Sedalia, Colorado, all the cult activity there. And Robin Anderson connected to some kind of church program, traveling to New York and Washington, D.C. weeks before the shooting. And also claiming Chris Morris is in a national trenchcoat mafia, also being the one to actually purchase weapons for Eric and Dylan from alleged CIA handlers. I mean, this is kind of crazy. Government Patsy also posted this. Document 8,245. All of this is sourced in the documentation. So, coincidence theorists, authority worshipping cultists who hallucinate that this is all made up conspiracy nonsense, it's all in the official documents. I mean, how lazy are the coincidence theorists and the Dunning-Kruger crowd who just dismiss all this as crazy conspiracy? It's all in the official documentation. And we haven't even seen all the redacted documents. If this is in the official release documents, one can only imagine what is contained in the redacted and unreleased documentation. Also worth pointing out here, the men who Robin Anderson purchased one of the guns from were both career Pentagon employees. So again here we have 8,245 submitted by Marcus C. Mott, April 30th, 1999, Phoenix Field Division. Description of activity, report of interview. Synopsis, report of interview with Ron Hartman and Jim Washington at the Federal Bureau of Investigation office located in Colorado Springs, Colorado, April 30th, 1999. Narrative 1. April 30th, 1999. Mr. Ron Hartman and Mr. Jim Washington were interviewed at the FBI office in Colorado Springs. 2. Hartman and Washington state that Stevens Model 311D 12-gauge double-barrel shotgun by Savage, serial number A077513, was sold to an 18-year-old female on November 22nd, 1998. This 18-year-old female had just turned 18 a few weeks prior, and her age was confirmed by her Colorado driver's license. According to FBI Special Agent Keith Howland, Hartman and Washington were 100% sure the female was Robin Anderson, and the young man who accompanied her, they are 80% sure it was Dylan Klebold. That's curious. They couldn't positively identify Klebold. 3. The sale of the shotgun was conducted by Anderson, who paid for the firearm in cash, which she produced. No receipt was given, and when the shotgun was handed to Anderson, Klebold took the firearm himself. 4. An FBI 302 report of interview is attached with a full narrative of the events surrounding this firearm transaction. Washington is employed as a senior investigative and security specialist with Defense Security Service, DSS, 1935 Jamboree Suite 170, Colorado Springs. Washington has been with the DSS for 17 years and has a total of 26 years of service with the United States government. Hartman served 20 years in the armed forces, with his time split between the U.S. Navy between 57 and 61 and the U.S. Air Force between 61 and 77. Upon retirement from the Air Force, he became a civilian employee of the United States government, first at Fort Carson in Colorado Springs and then with the Defense Logistic Agency in Ogden, Utah. Due to downsizing on the part of the U.S. government, when the program he was assigned to in Utah was shut down, he retired from the government and is currently unemployed. So these are the two guys that she bought the gun from. A guy who works for the Defense Security Service. Interesting. Very, very interesting. All coincidental, probably. Now, if this was a covert op, does all of this make sense? If it's a covert op involving this occult activity and government agents and handlers, all of a sudden, everything kind of makes sense. That's why all these people are hovering around these teenagers. Government Patsy with another follow-up post here. The backgrounds of the dealers are highly provocative. Washington's nominal employer, the Defense Security Service, was one of the successors of the Defense Industrial Security Clearance Office. DISCO, that's a great name. Formerly the Defense Industrial Security Command, DISC. An obscure government agency tasked with conducting investigations of individuals whose work requires a security clearance. It's now known as the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency. So these are the guys that Robin Anderson just happened to buy the gun from? Anybody else find that weird? Not to mention Mark Main's, Philip Duran, connections to Sedalia, which Brooks Brown, who many consider and insist maintain was not involved in anything, he just happens to also be in Sedalia, as well as Tad Bowles, one of the alleged founders, and Robin Anderson claiming that Chris Morris is the only official member of the National Trenchcoat Mafia. How would she know about that? And she's buying a gun from these government contractors of obscure government agencies that require high-level security clearances. Anybody else find this weird? Does anybody else find this weird? So the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency, they do background checks on prospective defense employees, from tax and employment records to interviews with friends, family, neighbors, etc., to determine whether they are eligible for security clearance. Sometimes this extends to covert activity like surveillance of target individuals or planting a disco agent in a defense facility to pose as a subversive, to see if they can draw others out of the closet. There has been speculation that Lee Harvey Oswald was part of a disco operation, specifically in mid-63, when the reputed communist who had returned from the Soviet Union the previous year was inexplicably hired to work at a Dallas firm that did classified work for the U.S. Army. I mean, that's very curious. What do the coincidence theorists make of that? Their jurisdiction not only includes employees of the DoD and other government agencies, but also private contractors like Lockheed, Northrop, and Boeing. If an employee who already has a clearance is deemed a security threat, investigation of that individual similarly falls under this agency's purview. Naturally, this gives them a lot of power. They're essentially the internal security or police arm of the military-industrial complex, but how many people even know they exist? That's a good question, especially back in the 90s. In December 2004, the U.S. Army War College published a paper entitled Deception 101, Primer on Deception by Professor Joseph Cadell, U.S. Army War College External Research Program, from page 8 to 9. Quote, cover is the use of an apparently non-threatening activity to disguise preparation for or initiation of a hostile act. A common example is the use of a training exercise to hide preparations for an attack. If the training exercise was the last in a long series of training exercises which had not led to actual hostile action in the past, this could also be an example of conditioning, hence the tendency to refer to conditioning and cover. The two concepts are linked by their complementary definitions. In recent years, both the Yom Kippur War of 1973 and the Falklands War of 1982 were launched under the cover of training exercises similar to exercises which had occurred before, end quote. Professor Cattle was a combat intelligence officer in the U.S. Air Force, 73 to 76, and has taught at the Defense Intelligence College, 77 to 93, Air War College, 83 to 89, Joint Military Intelligence Training Center, 93 to 97, and the National Intelligence University, where he has been a professor emeritus since 2014. So this guy clearly outlined what cover is and how training exercises are used. Now, does that sound familiar to any events that might have transpired in the years after Columbine, in the previous 20 years or so? Any of that sound familiar to anybody? And of course, at Columbine, all of these training exercises directly before the event. I mean, I guess the coincidence theorists are going to write all that off too. Research Columbine posted this. Sometimes the drills are publicized as the actual event, where they need to stage an event rather than creating a false flag out of a real event. I suspect a recent infamous shooting, I'm not going to name the school because for some reason social media does not like anybody talking about this particular event, was a drill that the media portrayed as a real event. And I'm starting to think that that particular shooter wasn't even a real person, and they planted him, whoever was doing the typing, on forums to establish a history to make him seem legit. Recently, someone anonymous that nobody can identify happened to find this particular shooter's YouTube channel from way back then out of nowhere. I don't buy it if it really is the shooter's voice, but I don't buy that just somebody happened to find it after all these years. What have they accomplished since Columbine? That would be a good place to start to figure out why. Perhaps it was the foundation for the 2000s in furthering the gun control agenda. Now, here's an interesting quote from Sue Klebold. Now, a lot of people have mixed opinions on Sue Klebold, but here's an interesting article from February 13th, 2016 in The Guardian. Quote, before the meeting, Tom and I were still convinced that Dylan had either been a reluctant participant or accidentally become entangled in something bigger than he understood at the time. We heard a rumor that military training materials on brainwashing techniques had been found in Eric Harris's home, which had refueled our belief that Dylan had been another victim of the tragedy. It was plausible. Eric's father did have a military background, end quote. So apparently there were a bunch of meetings to re-educate the Klebolds about what exactly happened. But again, mother's instinct here is stating that mother and father's instinct, they believed that Dylan had either been a reluctant participant or accidentally become entangled in something bigger than he understood at the time. Now, regarding Eric Harris, there are stories, I went over this in previous episodes, that because his father was at a military base in New York State where apparently Eric Harris was in the facility, and some allege that brainwashing began at that point. Also, apparently there was some handler, at least he claimed, Eric Harris mentioned that he had to go to some guy's house like once a week, possibly some kind of CIA or upper government agent for some reason. The coincidence theorists probably say that was some kind of counselor or something. Either way, highly suspicious without identifying exactly who that was. And John Quinn is the one who claims that there's evidence that Eric Harris was subjected to mind control experiments at Plattsburgh Air Force Base, tied to MK Ultra. There's also an interesting article here from the Washington Post, October 18th, 2002. Columbine, Moore's self-centered bullseye. Littleton's primary employer is defense contractor Lockheed Martin, and Moore speculates that the town's proximity to, even dependence on, lethal machinery somehow inured the boys to the realities of death and killing. Huh. Regarding Sue Klebold's statement, a Jarm 2014 posted this: I always suspected the parents knew what was going on the entire time, especially Wayne Harris. But I can't imagine Sue Klebold would make a public statement like that if she was actually involved in any way. Of course, maybe they told her to say that in order to make the rumors die down, as the average person would be inclined to take the parents' word on something. Either way, I find it really interesting that an alleged Patsy's parent would make a statement like that. Just adds to the mystery. Apologies for Existence posted this. This is a small observation, but I was looking at the news footage of the unidentified dead body dressed in all black on the stretcher being removed from the back of an ambulance with the white sheets covering his face. And I noticed there was a IV drip bag attached to him. Someone asked him for the source, but he did not provide it, so I don't know which video this is referring to. So if anybody knows out there, they can mention that. Now, okay, let's move on to addressing the planting of the bombs, which was supposedly caught on camera, but not found by investigators. So, this is an article by Alan Pendergast, Westward, July 8th, 2016. Did police investigation miss key moment in Columbine attack? 17 years after the attack on Columbine High School, amateur sleuths have posted a video that calls into question, again, the official version of events, their sequence surrounding the most infamous school shooting in American history. The video features brief, grainy images that appear to show the killers placing bombs in the school cafeteria shortly before 11 on the morning of April 20th, 1999, an event that law enforcement officials claimed wasn't captured on camera and occurred a full quarter hour later. The discrepancy is significant for several reasons. The official timeline for the attack, though repeatedly challenged by some victims' families and contradicted by evidence found in 911 calls and dispatch traffic, has been relied on as gospel by numerous journalists, authors, and violence prevention experts seeking to extract the lessons of Columbine. The video analysis, if correct, indicates that basic assumptions behind many of those accounts and studies are wrong. It also suggests that the killer's propane bombs concealed in large duffel bags sat undetected under tables for much longer than previously believed, while the cafeteria filled with students grabbing lunch. The full video, released on YouTube by the Columbine Video Archives, shows a figure dressed similar to Eric Harris hauling bags into the cafeteria at 10:58 a.m., headed towards the tables where the bombs, which failed to explode, were later found. The closed-circuit camera system, which switches among 4 different camera angles every few seconds, catches the same individual leaving empty-handed. A few seconds after that, the same angle shows a taller individual whose long, loping stride closely resembles that of Dylan Klebold, carrying another heavy bag into the Columbine Commons. JCSO spokesman Mark Techmeyer declined to comment on the video. Quote, "This is a closed investigation, and we no longer have anything of evidentiary value to evaluate." End quote, he said. The Columbine investigation involved many months of police work by representatives of more than a dozen law enforcement agencies and included extensive review of the surveillance footage from the cafeteria. But if the investigation somehow missed the arrival of the killers with their bombs, it wouldn't be the only error in the official timeline. Faced with lawsuits and widespread criticism of the police response to the attack, investigators were under some pressure to present findings in light favorable to law enforcement. A westward analysis of 911 and dispatch calls released many months after the attack showed that the sheriff's report incorrectly claimed that officers were on scene earlier than they actually arrived. One gun battle between Harris and officers on the school's west side apparently occurred more than 10 minutes later than the report claims it did. And of course, officials worked earnestly for 2 years to conceal a draft affidavit for a warrant to search Eric Harris's house, prepared a year before the attack in response to complaints that he was building pipe bombs and threatening other students. So let's examine this. So if it was a covert op of some kind, and I'm not claiming it was or it wasn't, this is MINDSHOCK, where the only thing we know for sure is that we don't know anything for sure. We don't pretend and hallucinate like coincidence theorists do. But if it was some kind of covert op with a set date and set plan, obviously law enforcement, they couldn't arrest Harris or Klebold on any major charges that would keep them in jail or in prison unable to carry out the government op. So it does kind of make sense. Again, I'm not claiming anything is true or untrue, but if this was a government op, a lot of these pieces actually fall into place. Also, how incompetent are law enforcement that they don't even spot? I mean, it's weird. Was the video doctored after the fact to show, or whatever video was released wasn't the original video that did show Harris and Klebold planning the bombs? A poster posted this. That means they either intentionally scrubbed the real timeline for this BS two-shooter narrative, or they were deliberately incompetent in following leads or doing any actual investigation as they claimed they did. I believe they did both. Not only was it a cover-up for other shooters and the covert military op this was, but also to hide the police department's expletive up. Government Patsy posted, the fact that they're explicitly stating that they won't rectify such a clear and significant discrepancy, that this is a closed investigation, should be sobering for anyone who believes Jefferson County would be interested in pursuing an investigation into other suspects. That is kind of weird, though, because if the evidence did come out that, let's say this wasn't, or let's say the investigative agencies, whether this was a covert op or not, let's say the investigative agencies were not aware that it was, and let's say they're honest, and they weren't aware, there weren't orders from above to shut down any narratives of additional shooters. They're not interested in prosecuting any additional murderers. I mean, is this not law enforcement? Anybody else think that weird? Does anybody else think that's weird? Another poster posted this. I've always known that this footage of the bomb planting existed since 2017, just never fully realized until now why the cover-up. Why change the bomb planting time from 10:58 to 11:17? Why tell the public that the tapes were changed by a custodial staff member at the exact time the planting took place? What were Harris and Klebold and the rest of the Trenchcoat Mafia doing between those 19 minutes? Why lie? And that's a good point, too, because if they're saying that the tapes were changed by a custodian, that means they would have to know that the planting wasn't caught on tape and surmise that the only time it could have been was during the switch. So, I mean, how does anybody rectify law enforcement officially stating that the tapes were being changed at the time the bombs were planted? Another post here. I believe the cops were told to not investigate certain leads and to just gather evidence for the FBI. I recall hearing that all but one of the 7 investigatory teams were all headed or co-headed by an FBI agent. All except one whose lead was CBI, Colorado Bureau of Investigation, and he himself was an ex-FBI agent. What were the FBI trying to cover up? They enhanced, in quotations, the cafeteria footage, collected all trace evidence of ballistics along with the BATF and the lead FBI supervisory SA, Dwayne Fusilier, for the case, who had a son who went to Columbine and associated with the Trenchcoat Mafia. Of course, he would cover for the Trenchcoat Mafia. I am wondering if the reason the other shooters were allowed to walk is if they were informants for the FBI and used by the government as MK Ultra Delta programmed killers. Of course, this goes much deeper than just the feds or police, but it's too much to include in one post. Government Patsy responded with this: "That's true, especially some interesting characters among them, example Mark Holstlaw, who co-headed the associates team assigned to investigate the suspect's friends, including the Trenchcoat Mafia." From Holstlaw's LinkedIn, Holstlaw began his career in Army intelligence in '83, and during the Gulf War he commanded a 200-soldier military intelligence unit, providing strategic and battlefield intelligence support to military commanders in the field. He returns to the U.S. and is made a special agent in charge of Army counterintelligence in the Pacific with a range of duties including, quote, coordinating offensive counterintelligence operations and conducting liaison with law enforcement and intelligence agencies including the FBI, CIA, DIA, and NSA, end quote. So this is the guy that's called in to investigate the Trenchcoat Mafia friends. Interesting. From 91 to 2017, he's with the FBI, participating in the investigations of the 93 bombing of the World Trade Center, the 95 Oklahoma City bombing, and 9/11. So this guy's involved in all major events. So if it is some kind of covert op, I mean, again, it kind of adds up. Government Patsy goes on to state this: "I also think that these other suspects have some type of intelligence connection. Agree there's a likely connection to the U.S. government's psychological research as well, the history of which predates even MKUltra and can be traced to at least World War II, likely much earlier. It may be of interest here that FBI's J. Edgar Hoover corresponded regularly with Dr. George Estabrooks, one of the U.S. government's consultants on hypnosis, and among those who openly acknowledged that he'd successfully induced multiple personalities in soldiers for use in covert operations. You might be onto something with respect to the CI angle. I believe these types of arrangements may provide cover by which state actors justify continued protection of assets used in illegal operations." Another post here: "Do you know that the government has the ability to basically turn anyone into a racist Nazi program killer and then turn it off like a switch so that the subject has no recollection of such event? I believe this is what happened to all these Trenchcoat Mafia shooters. One second they are in another alter ego personality, and then the next second they have no clue what they just did. An example of these shooters' alter egos were Reb, Vodka, and Grunt, who was Chris Morris. Also Kibbs, who was Zach Heckler. Our government is obsessed with Nazism. It has infiltrated politics and government. Remember Operation Paperclip. I also believe the parents of all the shooters may have been mind-controlled. For example, how is it that Robert Perry's mom and neighbor both said that he was home sleeping while the attack was taking place, while we know he was at the school shooting kids? More examples, page 10,193 from Angel Pitlinsky. Called Harris's mom at 1 p.m. on April 20th. Quote, his mother was extremely calm and stated that Eric was at school, end quote. Page 10,222, Detective Wheeldon, Sheridan Police Department. Wheeldon noticed, while standing outside with the Harrises, that neither Mr. or Mrs. Harris appeared upset or surprised of what was happening. That's an interesting quote from Detective Wheeldon, page 10,222. Also, other reports of shooters acting like they had no clue what was happening immediately after the shooting makes me believe they were switched from their alter egos and had their memories erased. Andrea Cook, page 5,188, said Robert Perry was very angry at the shooters when she saw him at Clement Park Library just before noon. Matt Reichs, page 5,634, Perry was angry because his sister was jeopardized. I mean, and that's an interesting point too, because Joe Stair, Robert Perry, if they were MK Ultra mind controlled, because some people believe they would not have participated if their siblings were in the school. But again, if they were MK mind controlled, that takes that out of the equation. Crystal Bergazzi, page 5225, said Chris Morris was in a hurry to get to school and angry that police would not let him drive through to the school when she saw him in Clement Park at 12:15 p.m. Tad Bowles, page 10,656. Sergeant arrived at his house around noon. Bowles drove to Clement Park because Sergeant was in a panic because he could not find a friend of his. And regarding the CI angle, all these dudes had criminal records. I recall seeing online reports of Perry having at least 10 court records, and Morris even had a criminal record at age 7. I believe these records could be related to juvenile drug charges, vandalism, theft, assault, breaking and entering, etc. It is my opinion that these shooters were given an ultimatum that they could not refuse in order for them to have their criminal records expunged. Maybe perhaps snitching or partaking in a massacre either with their willingness to do so or forced through MK Ultra, or both. How is it that both Harris and Klebold were let off their diversion programs so early and had their records expunged? Yeah, I went over that in previous episodes. I mean, that's another curiosity. They were promised to attend anger management, do community service, and psychiatric treatment. Maybe that is where further MK Ultra was being pushed into their heads along with the drugs that both were taking. Klebold was witnessed by at least one friend in one known report of taking the antidepressants Paxil and Zoloft and had urged him to come off of it. Not to mention that Klebold's medical records are sealed. Little did Harris and Klebold know that they would end up being set up as patsies for this event. You know what's weird too? If there is an MK Ultra component, and I'm not claiming there is, but if there is, and they were being programmed, these urges or subconscious desires to like kill and shoot and plan this massacre, they could think that it was their own doing and their own will when it actually wasn't. Dark theories here, dark theories. Regarding both of them being released, another post here. Other than their stellar performance, it is very rare on occasion that both were released months before the due date. Maybe the cops were told, release them, we need them for a covert operation. The final report stated that only 5% of perps are let out early. And this is also listed on edition.cnn.com regarding their diversionary program. So statistically, one of them possibly could have been released, but both are let out months early. I don't know what to make of that. And why are Klebold's medical records still sealed? What's on them? I believe his official autopsy still sealed as well? Another interesting post here. FBI isn't under any jurisdiction. That's a government agency. You know why Jeffco doesn't have any evidence? Because as soon as the crime scene happened, it was federalized. The FBI and ATF confiscated all original and copies of evidence and ballistics from the crime scene. FBI, too, were the ones who edited the original cafeteria footage showing shooters all over the school, including the footage from the administration and library areas. The tapes the parents of the victims saw were definitely edited. You know who owns the real copies? FBI, and we will never see them. Also, as far as I know, they destroyed everything else except for Dylan's clothes. Those were given to his father and mother. They also had fought in court for his journals, math homework, and his doodling, but in the end, they only received his clothes that he wore during the massacre. Also, does anyone know if they destroyed the guns, shell casings, bomb fragments, etc. used in the attack? If somebody knows, please respond. I do know that Dylan's 82 BMW still exists and was placed on eBay a couple years ago, but eBay pulled the listing. The only thing they haven't released for us would be the full library 911 call and transcript, the Nixon tape, the witness statements from people in the science hall, the school district's own report on the shooting, including disciplinary records of Trenchcoat Mafia members, footage of the snipers on the roof, footage from the administration and library areas, the full unedited cafeteria footage, and on-scene footage of the first 30 minutes of the attack from local media. Anything I'm missing, please add or reply to the list. So this is what another poster thinks. Again, I'm not claiming any of that is true or untrue. Let's go to another post here from Super Saiyan Fan. Thousands of Columbine records remain secret. Posted April 2nd, 2003 or prior. So this was quoting from P. Solomon Banda's Associate Press article, April 2nd, 2003. A task force has been authorized to review about 6,300 still secret documents and files on the Columbine High School shootings to determine what information may be released to the public. The process of reviewing the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office files could take months. Alan Gilbert of the Columbine Open Records Task Force said Wednesday, the Sheriff's Office has released 25,647 Columbine-related documents, some at the request of the task force and others at the order of a district judge. Attorney General Ken Salazar and Jefferson County District Attorney Dave Thomas established the task force in early 2002 to help answer lingering questions about the April 20th, 1999 shooting attack that killed 12 students and a teacher at Columbine High School. Salazar had suggested disbanding the group because Jeffco Sheriff Russ Cook, who took office in January, was willing to cooperate. Former Sheriff John Stone had balked at releasing some records publicly. Members of the families of slain students Lauren Townsend, Daniel Rohrbaugh, and Cassie Bernal attend the task force meeting. After meeting with the families of the slain students, Salazar and Thomas said the group will continue its work. You have to restore faith in law enforcement, said Brian Rohrbaugh, whose son Daniel died in the shooting. The only way to do that is to release that information. The task force does not have subpoena power or funding, and its members serve voluntarily. Because of the composition of this task force, it does have the authority of who we are, Thomas said. In addition to the sheriff's documents, the group wants to make public documents collected by a law firm working for the Jefferson County School District. James Branham, representing the district, told the task force those documents are protected by client attorney privilege and privacy laws. Brooks Brown, whose father, Randy Brown, is a member of the task force, said he believes the district is trying to protect itself. Once that information is released, it will make them look bad, he said. Randy Brown and his wife, Judy, filed a report with the sheriff's office in March 98, alleging Harris had threatened to kill Brooks and had written of pipe bombs and mass murder on the internet. The report was investigated, but no action was taken. Salazar also said in his office filed a brief in the Colorado Court of Appeals supporting the Denver Post's request for the release of videotapes, which show Harris and Klebold holding weapons, describing their anger and feelings of alienation, and saying what they intended to do. A separate lawsuit is pending in federal court. And again, like how many other shootings have this amount of redacted and classified in documents and information? I mean, it's just crazy. A post by Mama for Pause here. This stuff should have been made public a long time ago. If you have nothing to hide, why hide it? They can give all the excuses they want for not releasing the info, but I think it was just a plain cover-up. Hiding their own investigation, maybe. They did not count on people caring about what happened. Then we showed up. Randy and some of the parents wanting and needing the truth, tired of the lies. These are the ones who have worked hard to get information. That should have been made public. If they were not continuing the April 20th, 1999 investigation, looking for others, my 2 cents. Super Saiyan also posted this article from Rocky Mountain News, 6,300 pieces of evidence withheld by the sheriff's office, by Jeff Cass and Kevin Vaughan. Rocky Mountain News, April 3rd, 2003. Approximately 6,300 documents and items related to the Columbine shooting remain sealed inside the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office, officials said Wednesday. They also said that's not a full accounting of all items. The numbers were released at Columbine Records Review Task Force meeting. Task Force co-chair and Solicitor General Alan Gilbert said the Sheriff's Office has 32,000 documents and items, which he classified as very highly organized. Approximately 26,000 have been released. Sheriff spokeswoman Jackie Tallman said the 32,000 figure includes a particular batch of 1,200 items featuring CD-ROMs of photos, videos, yearbooks, and school papers from Columbine killers Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold. But that isn't only a partial accounting of all evidence items. The sheriff has thousands of bullet fragments, bombs, and weapons not typically released to the public. Approximately 11,000 crime scene photos have not been released. Gilbert is planning a more detailed inventory. Attorney General Ken Salazar and possibly others will then recommend to Sheriff Russ Cook what they believe should be released. Salazar did not rule out a lawsuit to get more documents released, but said it is still early in the process. Gilbert provided a breakdown of the 6,300 documents and items based on his preliminary review. 3,000 pages of medical records, 1,200 videos, photos, and written documents, 850 cross-reference sheets indicating where certain documents are located, 600 pages of photo lineups and criminal histories, 450 pages of writings from Harrison Klebold, 250 pages of search warrants. That's a lot of pages. Task Force member Randy Brown on Wednesday circulated a January court filing indicating the sheriff has no objection to the unsealing of any remaining warrants. Also Wednesday, Jeffco DA Dave Thomas said he will seek a court order to release dozens of pages from his office known as the prosecutor's files. The files were opened when Harris and Klebold were caught breaking into a van more than 1 year before the shootings. Okay, let's examine this. So now, a lot of coincidence theorists, they kind of just say, oh, the unreleased stuff is just dead bodies. Yeah, I mean, obviously, nobody needs to see that in terms of, video or photo evidence of dead bodies. But thousands and thousands of other photographs? I mean, what do they show? Clearly additional weapons, additional shell cases that clearly don't match the official narrative because there were multiple shooters. Maybe even dead bodies of the other shooters. Or possible other, whatever, dressed in black government ops that were killed. Initially reported over 25 people killed. Who are these people? Again, make sure you watch all the episodes in this series. Now, the other thing that's really interesting is the cross-reference sheets. Why would the 850 cross-reference sheets are classified? Why would that be unless they're specifically indicating documents that clearly don't match the official narrative, like additional shooters? And also 600 pages of photo lineups? Is that because witnesses clearly identified other shooters? 450 pages of writings from Harrison Klebold. Now that's curious. That's curious. A lot of the coincidence theorists also say that if other shooters were involved, Harrison Klebold would have clearly mentioned them. How does anybody know they didn't? With this amount of classified and withheld information, how does anybody really know what was or wasn't mentioned by Harrison Klebold, other than pretending and hallucinating, like coincidence theorists love to do? The Dunning-Kruger crowd loves to do that. And 250 pages of search warrants, that's also curious, because are they search warrants for the additional shooters? If there were any additional shooters, and a ton of evidence of that. I mean, that's a lot. Like, that's a lot.